Welcome to this profound exploration of life's deepest lessons, drawn from those who've stood at its edge. This audiobook, Dying to Live, Lessons from the Edge of Life, isn't just about death, it's about life. It's about what truly matters when time grows short, and how we can embrace those truths now, while we still have time. Each chapter is filled with stories, reflections, and wisdom gathered from moments of vulnerability, courage, and clarity. This book was written and published by Mindful Literary, a space dedicated to creating works that touch hearts, stir souls, and remind us of the extraordinary in the ordinary. As you listen, let these stories and lessons settle into your heart. And if this book resonates with you, consider supporting us by getting your own copy from our Ko-Fi shop. Your support helps us continue to create meaningful work that inspires reflection, connection, and growth. Now let's begin. Take a breath, settle in, and allow yourself to fully experience the wisdom within these pages. After all, the most important lessons about living are often whispered to us by those facing the end. Introduction: The Edge of Everything. At the edge of life, everything sharpens: the edges of fear, the softness of love, the weight of regret, the brilliance of gratitude. Mortality acts like a mirror, reflecting back the raw, unvarnished truth of what it means to live. And yet, so many of us wait until the final moments to notice. The hospice nurse. The sun was setting outside the hospice window, painting the sky in shades of gold and lavender. The faint scent of antiseptic mingled with the soft floral fragrance of lilies arranged in a vase on the bedside table. Clara adjusted the blankets around Mr. Harrison, a man in his late 70s whose body was frail but whose eyes still carried sparks of life. He was in his final days, though he had stopped marking time by days or hours. "Clara," he said, his voice a faint whisper, "you know what's funny?" She leaned closer, her practiced hands resting lightly on the side of the bed. "Tell me. I've spent my whole life worrying about things that didn't matter. Promotions, the size of my house, whether I was winning or losing at life. And now, all I want is another moment to feel the sun on my face or to hear my daughter's laugh one more time." Clara nodded, her throat tightening. She had heard these words, or variations of them, countless times before. At the edge of life, clarity arrives like a bright light cutting through fog. The distractions fall away. The masks people wear, the ones made of ambition, comparison, and ego, drop to the floor like discarded costumes. And what remains? Love, connection. The small, tender moments that linger when everything else has faded. Mr. Harrison sighed softly and closed his eyes, his face peaceful in a way that only comes when someone has made peace with what is. Clara sat quietly by his side for a while, watching the sky deepen into night, her heart holding the weight of 1,000 stories like his. There's something about facing mortality that strips life bare. It reveals what matters and what doesn't. It peels away excuses, fears, and self-imposed limitations. It forces us to confront the question, did I truly live? In her years as a hospice nurse, Clara had seen people cling to life with fierce love and let go with quiet acceptance. But she had also seen people wrestle with regret. Regret not for the mistakes they made, but for the chances they didn't take, the words they didn't say, and the joy they postponed for later. The edge of life is both brutal and beautiful. It's where illusions die and truth emerges, raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. But why, Clara often wondered, do we wait until we're standing on that edge to start seeing clearly? Why do we wait? We live as if we have endless tomorrows. I'll travel when I have more money. I'll say I love you when the moment feels perfect. I'll take care of my health when life slows down. But life doesn't slow down. It moves forward relentlessly, one breath, one sunrise, one ticking clock at a time. The edge of life teaches us something that we often resist. The time to love is now. The time to forgive is now. The time to live fully, deeply, unapologetically is now. Yet we delay. We wait for permission, for certainty, for a perfect moment that may never arrive. But perfection is a myth, and time is a gift we cannot guarantee. People who stand on the edge of life, staring into the unknown, often share the same wisdom. Stop waiting for the right moment. Say what you need to say. Let go of what doesn't matter. Find joy in the ordinary. These aren't groundbreaking lessons. They aren't complicated, but they are true. And yet, We forget them again and again, until we're forced to remember. This book is not about death. It's about life. It's about what happens when we stop waiting for the perfect moment and start living fully in the one we have. It's about finding clarity before it's too late. It's about embracing vulnerability, loving fiercely, and showing up with your whole heart. It's about living with intention, gratitude, and courage, not someday, but today. The edge of life has lessons to teach us, but we don't have to wait until we're standing there to learn them. We can lean in, listen, and let those lessons change us now. Why do we wait until the end to start living fully? Take a moment to ask yourself, what am I waiting for? What have I been putting off? Love, joy, forgiveness, adventure. Until someday? If I knew my time was limited, how would I live differently today? The truth is, our time is limited. But knowing that isn't a cause for despair. It's an invitation. An invitation to love harder, to forgive quicker, to notice the golden light in the afternoon, to savor the warmth of coffee on your lips, and to cherish the laughter of someone you love. Clara finished her shift and stepped out into the cool night air. The stars blinked softly overhead, and the distant hum of the city filled the silence. She took a deep breath, her chest expanding with the sharp clarity that comes from standing close to the edge. Day after day, patient after patient. Don't wait, she whispered into the night. Don't wait to live, to love, to be here fully. She walked to her car, her steps slow and deliberate, her heart heavy with stories and light with gratitude. And somewhere, in the stillness of that night, life continued, fragile, fleeting, sacred. This book is an invitation to stop waiting, to start living, and to let the edge of life teach us how to cherish every moment we're given. The edge isn't distant. It's here in every breath, every choice, every heartbeat. Are you ready to listen? Chapter 1. The moment everything shifts. When the illusion of endless time shatters, life sharpens into breathtaking clarity. The mundane becomes miraculous, the fleeting becomes precious, and every moment feels like a fragile gift. Death, in its cruel honesty, reveals the stunning beauty of being alive. The diagnosis. The doctor's office smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a cold glow on the beige walls and the framed degrees hanging behind the desk. David sat in the stiff leather chair across from his oncologist, his wife, Sarah, clutching his hand tightly. Stage 4. Terminal. The words hung in the air like shards of glass, sharp and final. The doctor kept speaking, something about timelines, treatment options, pain management, but David couldn't hear him anymore. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and his world shrank into a pinprick of light. Terminal. It felt like a word meant for someone else. An abstract concept. A story in a movie. But now it was his word. His reality. As they walked out of the hospital and into the bright afternoon sunlight, David felt something shift inside him. The world hadn't changed. The cars still honked impatiently at the traffic light. A jogger ran past with headphones in. The sky stretched wide and impossibly blue. But he had changed. For the first time in years, maybe decades, David noticed the way the sunlight hit the leaves of a nearby tree, casting patterns of gold and green on the pavement. He noticed the sound of laughter spilling from a nearby cafe, sharp and bright against the city noise. He noticed Sarah's hand still wrapped in his, her thumb tracing small circles against his skin. It was all so alive. Why had it taken something so final, so devastating, for him to see it? Death has a way of rearranging priorities without asking for permission. The small worries, the clutter, the petty arguments, the unpaid bills, suddenly fade into insignificance. The noise of life dims, and what remains are the essentials. Love, connection, gratitude, presence. David realized something as he sat in the park later that evening, watching the sun set behind the city skyline. He had been asleep. Not literally, but spiritually, emotionally. He had been rushing, striving, checking boxes, planning for a future he had assumed was guaranteed. But it wasn't guaranteed, not for him, not for anyone. And yet, in the sharp, unyielding light of his diagnosis, David felt something he hadn't expected: freedom. Freedom from the weight of someday. Freedom from the illusion of control. Freedom to truly see his life for the fleeting miracle it was. Most of us live with the quiet belief that time is unlimited. We'll tell them we love them tomorrow. We'll take that trip someday. We'll start writing the book, learning the skill, chasing the dream, eventually. But eventually is a fragile thing. Time is not something we own. It's something we're given. And one day, without warning, it runs out. David realized that the diagnosis didn't change his reality, it simply revealed it. He had always been mortal. His time had always been finite. He just hadn't been paying attention. What if we didn't wait until the end to start noticing the gift of now? Over the following weeks, David's life didn't suddenly become grand or extraordinary. He didn't sell all his possessions and move to an island. He didn't check off every item on a bucket list. Instead, he noticed. He noticed the sound of rain tapping against the window in the early morning. He noticed the way Sarah hummed softly to herself while making coffee. He noticed the way laughter felt in his chest when his daughter told him a terrible joke over dinner. These moments, small, ordinary, unremarkable, felt like treasures hidden in plain sight. And perhaps David thought, this is what living really means. Not chasing some grand, elusive idea of happiness, but simply being awake to the life you already have. What changes when we know time is finite? When faced with mortality, people often experience the same shift. They speak more honestly. They love more deeply. They forgive more freely. They become fiercely present in their own lives. It's not because they become someone new. It's because they finally see what was there all along. Mortality doesn't give us more time. It gives us clarity. But here's the truth. You don't need a terminal diagnosis to wake up to your life. You don't need to be standing at the edge of everything to see what truly matters. David's story isn't about death. It's about life. It's about the way mortality can sharpen our focus and strip away the noise until all that's left is now. The question isn't whether time is finite. It is. The question is, what will you do with the time you have? What would change if we lived with the awareness that time is finite? Take a moment to ask yourself, if I knew my time was limited, what would I stop postponing? Who would I call, forgive, or embrace? What would I notice, savor, or celebrate in my ordinary day? Time isn't something we can save or stockpile, but we can spend it well. We can show up fully and fiercely for the moments we're given, however long or short they may be. David sat on a bench in the park as the day faded into twilight. His diagnosis hadn't gone away. The weight of it still sat in his chest, heavy and real. But so did the lightness of seeing, of feeling, of being. The sky above him turned soft shades of violet and gold, and a single bird called out into the cooling air. David closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered two simple words into the gathering dark. Thank you, because sometimes the edge of life doesn't teach us how to die. It teaches us how to live. The sacred is waiting, not in the grand milestones, but in the small, fleeting moments we so often overlook. Can you wake up to the life you already have before the edge becomes impossible to ignore? Chapter 2. The Illusion of Tomorrow. Tomorrow is the most comfortable lie we tell ourselves. It's where our dreams, our apologies, and our courage go to wait. But someday isn't a day on the calendar. It's a mirage. And when we reach for it, it vanishes, leaving only today. The woman and the empty canvas. The attic smelled faintly of dust and forgotten memories. Sunlight filtered through a small window, illuminating boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls and a canvas leaning untouched against an easel. Laura stood in the middle of the room, arms crossed, staring at the blank canvas she had bought over 5 years ago. She had always loved painting, or at least she had once. Her teenage years had been filled with brushstrokes and vibrant colors, late nights spent with smudges of paint on her cheeks and a heart full of joy. But then life happened. There were bills to pay, responsibilities to meet, emails to answer. There were groceries to buy, kids to drive to soccer practice, and late nights spent on spreadsheets instead of sunsets. Someday, she had said every time she walked past the attic door. Someday, when the kids are older. Someday, when work slows down. Someday, when there's more time. But today, standing in the dusty attic with a letter in her hand, a diagnosis from her doctor, Laura realized something terrible. Someday had never come. The letter hadn't said terminal, but it had said serious. It had said urgent. It had said don't wait. She reached out and touched the canvas with trembling fingers. It was still blank. All those years, all those tomorrows she had imagined, the ones where she'd finally sit down and create something beautiful, had slipped through her fingers like sand. And now, time felt sharp and fragile, no longer infinite. Someday is seductive. It's comforting to imagine that there's a better time coming, a time when we'll be less busy, more courageous, more ready. Someday we'll write the book. Someday we'll travel to that place we've always dreamed of seeing. Someday we'll have that hard conversation, mend that broken relationship, say the words we've been swallowing. But someday isn't a promise, it's a postponement. It's the place we send our unlived dreams, hoping they'll wait patiently for us. But time doesn't wait. We live as if we're guaranteed a future. We plan for retirement. We put off joy. We assume there will be time later for all the things we're not doing now. But life isn't a contract. The world doesn't owe us tomorrow. The sun doesn't promise it will rise for us again. The clock doesn't pause when we're too busy to notice it ticking. Laura realized this as she sat on the attic floor, surrounded by her forgotten art supplies. Every brush, every tube of paint, every blank canvas was a monument to the illusion she had been living in. That time would always be there, waiting for her. It wasn't. What are we waiting for? The truth is, most of us are waiting for something. When the kids grow up, when the mortgage is paid, when we lose weight, when we feel ready. But the right time is a myth. The stars won't align perfectly. The to-do list will never be finished. The moment we're waiting for doesn't exist. Laura realized something profound as she stared at her canvas. Life doesn't happen someday. It happens now. Every time we postpone our dreams, we trade something irreplaceable. Time. Energy. The version of ourselves that could have existed if we had just begun. We assume life is linear, that there's a predictable arc to follow. But sometimes life doesn't follow the script. Accidents happen. Illness arrives uninvited. Time runs out when we least expect it. Laura's diagnosis wasn't a death sentence, but it was a wake-up call. It said, stop waiting. Stop assuming there will always be more time. Start now. Laura did something she hadn't done in years. She picked up a paintbrush. Her hands were unsteady, her strokes uneven, but she didn't care. Color spread across the canvas, messy, raw, alive. For hours, she painted. The light outside faded into dusk, but Laura didn't notice. For the first time in years, she felt awake. She wasn't painting a masterpiece. She wasn't chasing perfection. She was simply starting. Because someday is a lie, but today is real. Laura's story isn't about painting. It's about living. It's about the quiet but profound realization that every day is a gift, not a guarantee. The chance to say, I love you. The chance to watch the sunset without rushing past it. The chance to begin the thing you've been postponing. Every tomorrow we're given is not something we're owed. It's something we're given. And the question is, what will we do with it? What are we putting off for a future that isn't guaranteed? Ask yourself, what have I been waiting for someday to begin? What small step can I take today toward a dream I've been postponing? If I knew time was limited, what would I stop delaying? Life isn't happening in the abstract someday. It's happening now. The canvas is blank. The brush is in your hand. Start painting. Start writing. Start living. The next morning, Laura set up her easel in the sunniest corner of her home. She brewed her coffee, turned on soft music, and began painting again. She wasn't waiting for a perfect day. She wasn't waiting for the stars to align. She was simply showing up, to her art, to her life, to the fleeting miracle of now. When the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, she looked at her finished painting, a mess of color, movement, and life. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And as she stood back and admired her work, Laura realized something. She had been waiting for someday, but today had been enough. The sacred is waiting, not in an imagined tomorrow, but in the messy, beautiful now. What are you putting off for a future that isn't promised? Start today. Start now. Chapter 3. What we leave behind. We spend so much of our lives chasing achievements, accumulating possessions, and building monuments to our success. But when the final days come, legacy isn't measured in wealth or status. It's measured in the love we've given, the wisdom we've shared, and the impact we've had on the hearts of those we leave behind. The father and the letters. The afternoon sunlight slanted across the old wooden desk, catching dust particles suspended in the still air. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the faint scratch of pen on paper. Thomas sat hunched over the desk, his breath slightly labored, a cup of lukewarm tea forgotten by his side. Around him were scattered envelopes, each labeled with a name: Emily, Sam, and Olivia. The cancer had been slow and unrelenting. The doctors had stopped talking about treatment plans and started using words like quality of life. Thomas knew he wouldn't see his children graduate, get married, or hold their own children. But he could leave them something. Not money, there wouldn't be much of that. Not possessions, they would gather dust and fade with time. He would leave them words. Wisdom wrapped in ink. Memories bottled in sentences. He paused for a moment, staring at Emily's envelope. His eldest. What do you say when you know your words might outlive you? His hand trembled slightly as he began to write. Dear Emily, life will hand you joys, and it will hand you heartbreaks. Don't run from either. Both have something to teach you. The people you love are the most important thing you'll ever build. Be kind, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Hours passed unnoticed as Thomas wrote, letter after letter, pouring pieces of his heart onto each page. When we think of leaving a legacy, we often imagine grand gestures. Buildings named after us. Bank accounts overflowing for our heirs. Stories written in history books. But for most of us, legacy won't be something carved into stone. It will be something whispered in quiet moments. The way a child remembers their father's laugh. The advice a daughter carries into adulthood. The small acts of kindness someone learned from watching us. Thomas wasn't wealthy. He didn't have a corporation to pass down or property to bequeath. But he had moments. And in those moments, he had built a legacy. In the bedtime stories he had told. In the encouragement he had whispered before exams. In the way he had always made time, even when time felt scarce. When the clock is running out, people rarely talk about their job titles, their investment portfolios, or the size of their house. They talk about who they loved, who loved them in return, what they gave of themselves to others. Thomas's legacy wasn't in his savings account. It was in the ink drying on the letters scattered across his desk. His wisdom, his humor, his gentle encouragement, they would outlive him in his children's hearts. Because true legacy isn't about what we leave behind. It's about what we leave within. Legacy isn't built in grand gestures. It's built in the everyday. In the way we listen when someone needs to be heard. In the patience we offer when tempers flare. In the quiet, unnoticed acts of love that stitch our relationships together. The small moments, repeated over time, create something lasting. A child might not remember every vacation or every birthday gift, but they will remember the way their parent tucked them in at night, the warmth of a hand holding theirs during a storm, the quiet encouragement whispered in moments of doubt. These are the threads of legacy. Not gold, not trophies, just simple, enduring love. At the edge of life, a quiet fear often emerges. Will I be remembered? Will my life have mattered? But perhaps the better question isn't whether we'll be remembered. It's how we'll be remembered. Will they remember our kindness? Will they remember our courage? Will they remember that we showed up, not perfectly, but fully? Thomas wasn't trying to be remembered as a hero. He just wanted his children to know that he loved them deeply, that he believed in them fiercely, that his love would outlast his life. The letters Thomas wrote weren't just a gift for his children. They were a reminder for all of us. We are building our legacy right now. Not someday. Not when we have more time, more money, more resources. In this moment, with these choices, with these words. How do we speak to the people we love? How do we show up when someone needs us? How do we handle moments of anger, joy, or vulnerability? Our legacy isn't a final chapter. It's being written every single day. What kind of legacy are we creating in the small, everyday moments? Ask yourself, if today were my last day, what would I want the people I love to know? What small actions am I taking today that will leave a positive impact? Am I prioritizing the things that truly matter in the long run? Legacy isn't a grand finale. It's the quiet hum of a life well lived, a love well given, and wisdom passed gently into the hands of those who will carry it forward. The final envelope. Thomas placed the final letter into an envelope, sealed it carefully, and set it beside the others. His hand lingered on the stack for a moment, his chest rising with a deep, shaky breath. He wasn't afraid, not of death, not of being forgotten, because he had given everything he had to give. As he stood and looked out the attic window at the world bathed in golden light, he felt something close to peace. His legacy wasn't in the ink on the paper. It was in the love behind the words. and that love would carry on long after he was gone. The sacred is waiting, not in what we leave behind in wealth or achievements, but in what we leave behind in hearts. What story are you writing with your life right now? Chapter 4. The Power of Presence. In a world filled with noise, distractions, and endless demands, presence is a rare and powerful gift. To sit with someone, not to fix, not to entertain, not to distract, but simply to be, is one of the deepest expressions of love we can offer. The caregiver and the silence. The hospice room was quiet except for the faint hum of medical equipment and the slow, steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Afternoon sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft golden patterns across the bedsheets. Maria sat in the chair beside Mr. Ellis's bed. He had stopped speaking days ago, his body growing weaker with each passing hour. His breaths came slow and shallow, his chest rising and falling beneath the thin hospital blanket. She had been trained in caregiving, how to adjust 4 lines, monitor vitals, and administer medication. But none of that mattered in this moment. There was nothing left to do but be. Maria's hands rested lightly in her lap as she watched the man before her, whose life had once been filled with laughter, love, and purpose. She felt an ache in her chest, a quiet grief for someone she had only known briefly but who had somehow left an imprint on her heart. There were no words to say, no advice to offer, no comfort that could be packaged into tidy sentences. So Maria stayed. She stayed in the silence, her presence a steady anchor in the room where time felt both heavy and fleeting. And in that stillness, something happened. The air shifted. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't loud. But in the quiet, Maria realized something profound. Sometimes presence is enough. We are conditioned to believe that love is shown through doing, fixing problems, offering solutions, filling silences with words. But in moments of deep vulnerability, when someone is grieving, struggling, or standing at the edge of life, words often fall short. Presence, however, speaks a language that transcends words. The quiet stillness of sitting beside someone who is in pain, the gentle touch of a hand on a trembling shoulder, the soft, steady rhythm of breathing together in silence. Presence doesn't need to fix. It simply needs to be. If presence is so simple, why do we struggle with it? Because being truly present asks us to face our own discomfort. The discomfort of silence. The discomfort of not having the right words. The discomfort of vulnerability and raw emotion. We are wired to fill space, with noise, distractions, or busyness. But presence requires stillness. It asks us to stop, to set aside our phones, our plans, our carefully constructed masks, and simply be with someone. And that is terrifying, because in that stillness we can no longer hide from our own fears, our own grief, our own humanity. But that's also where the magic happens. Maria could have left Mr. Ellis's room. She could have filled the space with nervous chatter or distracted herself with her phone. But she stayed. And in staying, she offered something more valuable than words. She offered witness. She offered companionship. She offered presence. When we show up for someone, not to fix, not to solve, but to be, we are saying, "You are not alone. I see you. I am here with you in this moment." And sometimes, that is enough to bridge the vast chasm between suffering and love. In today's world, presence is increasingly rare. We check our phones during conversations. We nod along while our minds race ahead to the next task. We listen just enough to respond, but not enough to truly hear. We are there in body, but not in spirit. But when someone is dying, or grieving, or hurting, they don't need us to be perfect. They need us to be present, fully, quietly, without agenda. In the silence of that hospice room, Maria realized that presence isn't about grand gestures. It's about small, quiet moments of being there. Sitting with a friend who's just received bad news. Holding the hand of someone who's afraid. Pausing in a busy day to really see someone who feels invisible. These moments aren't loud, but they are holy. They are the spaces where love flows freely, unencumbered by expectation or performance. Presence isn't just for deathbeds or crisis moments. It's something we can practice every day. Looking into someone's eyes when they're speaking. Putting down our phone during a meal. Sitting in silence with someone who's grieving, without rushing to fill the space with platitudes. Presence doesn't require grand words or perfect timing. It requires attention. It requires stillness. It requires you. How present are we in our relationships and daily lives? Ask yourself, when was the last time I was truly present with someone, fully, without distractions? Do I avoid silence or discomfort by filling moments with busyness or words? Who in my life needs my presence right now, not my solutions? The greatest gift we can give someone isn't our advice, our productivity, or even our words. It's us, our full, undivided attention. When Mr. Ellis took his final breath, Maria was still sitting beside him. She didn't speak. She didn't cry out. She simply sat, quiet, steady, present. There were no grand speeches, no perfect final words. But there was love. In the stillness of that room, Maria realized that presence had done something extraordinary. It had made the final moments enough. As she walked out of the hospice and into the fading light of evening, Maria felt the weight of that truth settle into her chest. Presence isn't about changing the world. It's about showing up in the small spaces where love can breathe. And sometimes that's more than enough. The sacred is waiting, not in grand actions, but in the quiet courage to show up, to sit in silence, and to simply be. Can you offer someone the gift of your full presence today? Chapter 5. Regrets and Redemption. At the edge of life, regrets aren't about the mistakes we made. They're about the chances we never took, the words we never said, and the love we didn't express. In the quiet moments before goodbye, clarity emerges, and what remains are the echoes of what could have been, the hospice worker and the confessions. The hospice room was dimly lit, a small lamp casting a warm glow over the patient's frail face. Mary, a hospice worker for over 15 years, sat beside Mr. Grant, a retired teacher with kind eyes and trembling hands. He spoke softly, his voice barely louder than a whisper. I should have said yes more often. I should have spent more time with my family, traveled more, danced more. I should have let myself be happy. Mary nodded, her hand resting lightly on his. She had heard these words, or variations of them, countless times before. Regret was a familiar companion in these rooms. It sat quietly in corners, filled spaces between breaths, and lingered in the pauses between words. After Mr. Grant drifted into sleep, Mary sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. She thought about the hundreds of patients she had cared for over the years. There were patterns in their regrets, recurring themes in their final reflections. They didn't regret failing an exam, losing a job, or making a poor investment. They regretted not trying, not chasing their dreams, not spending time with the people they loved, not saying, I love you, I'm sorry, or I forgive you. Their regrets weren't loud or angry. They were quiet, heavy, and unbearably tender. And Mary couldn't help but wonder, why do we wait until the end to see what truly matters? The 5 common regrets. Over the years, Mary had noticed 5 regrets that surfaced most often. I wish I had lived true to myself, not what others expected of me. So many people had lived their lives trapped by the expectations of parents, society, or peers. They had silenced their passions, buried their dreams, and conformed to avoid judgment. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Time spent chasing career milestones often came at the cost of time with family, friends, or simple joy. Many had missed birthdays, sunsets, and quiet dinners because they were too busy earning, achieving, and climbing. I wish I had expressed my feelings. Fear of vulnerability had kept people silent. They hadn't said, I love you, to someone who needed to hear it. They hadn't spoken up about their hurt, fear, or longing. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. Friendships had faded into distant memories. Life had gotten busy, and meaningful relationships had been pushed aside. I wish I had let myself be happier. Many people realized too late that happiness is a choice, not a circumstance. They had postponed joy, waiting for the right time or the right conditions. Each regret carried a lesson, and Mary had carried those lessons with her like sacred truths. Why do we wait? If the regrets of the dying are so universal, why do we keep making the same mistakes? Because fear is a powerful thing. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of change, and because it's easy to believe in tomorrow. I'll tell them I love them tomorrow. I'll chase that dream next year. I'll prioritize happiness when things settle down. But time doesn't wait. And regret isn't born from failure, it's born from inaction. We can survive failure. We can heal from embarrassment. But we cannot reclaim time. Living without regret doesn't mean living without mistakes. It means living with intention. It means choosing to speak the words you're afraid to say. Take the risks that set your heart on fire. Make time for the people who matter most. Regret often stems from moments when we had a choice and stayed silent, stayed still, stayed afraid. But redemption is still possible, if we start now. Mary often told her patients, even in their final days, it's not too late. It's never too late to apologize. Say I love you. Write the letter you've been meaning to write. Forgive someone or yourself. Even if the time is short, even if the days are numbered, small acts of courage can heal deep wounds. Mr. Grant wrote a letter to his estranged daughter in his final days. He didn't know if she would read it or if she would forgive him, but he wrote it anyway, because trying, even at the end, was better than silence. Regret isn't something we can erase, but it's something we can transform. It's not a burden we have to carry to our final breath. It's a compass. It points us toward what matters most. If we listen, if we let regret teach us instead of paralyze us, it can become a gift. A gift that says, start now. Say the words. Take the chance. Don't wait. What's holding us back from living without regret? Ask yourself, what am I afraid to do, say, or feel? If my time were limited, what would I regret not doing? What step can I take today to live more fully, more honestly, more bravely? The time is now. Not someday. Not when everything feels perfect. Now. Before leaving the hospice room, Mary picked up the letter Mr. Grant had written to his daughter. She promised him she'd make sure it was delivered. Outside, the sky had turned a soft shade of pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. Mary stood in the fading light, clutching the letter to her chest, and whispered a silent promise to herself. No more waiting. No more postponing love, joy, or truth. No more regrets. She walked to her car, her steps steady and her heart full of quiet resolve. Because regret isn't inevitable. It's a choice we can rewrite every single day. The sacred is waiting, not in avoiding mistakes, but in living fully, bravely, and honestly. What step can you take today to live without regret? Chapter 6. Love is the only currency. When the final breath approaches, when the clock runs out, there is no room for pretense. The titles, the bank accounts, the accolades, they fade into irrelevance. All that remains, all that ever mattered, is love. The love we gave, the love we received, and the love we carried quietly in our hearts. The mother and the child. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of a bedside lamp. Machines beeped softly in the background, each sound a reminder of time slipping away. Anna lay propped up on pillows, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Her once vibrant eyes were now tired, but still soft with love. Beside her sat her son, James, his small hand cradled in hers. He was only 10, too young to understand the permanence of this moment, but old enough to feel the weight of it. "Are you in pain, Mommy?" he asked softly. Anna shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart. I'm just tired." The silence stretched between them, not heavy, but tender, fragile like glass. Anna looked at her son, memorizing every detail of his face, the curve of his smile, the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way his hair always fell into his forehead, no matter how many times she brushed it back. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I love you more than anything in this world. More than the stars, more than the sky. And no matter where I am, that love will always be with you. Always." James nodded, tears pooling in his wide eyes. He squeezed her hand tightly, as if he could hold her here with him through sheer will. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the hospital bills piling up in a drawer at home. Not the unfinished projects waiting at her desk. Not the missed opportunities or the roads not taken. All that existed in that room, in that fragile slice of time, was love. Pure, undistracted, eternal. At the end of life, love becomes the only thing that holds weight. Promotions won't hold our hand in our final hours. Bank balances won't whisper comforting words. Trophies and certificates won't offer warmth in the cold silence of goodbye. It's the people we loved, the hearts we touched, and the connections we nurtured that will linger. Love isn't measured in grand gestures. It's measured in presence. In showing up when someone needed us. In saying, I love you, even when it felt vulnerable. In choosing kindness over anger, patience over frustration. Love isn't just an emotion, it's a currency. And every interaction is a chance to spend it wisely. In the rush of daily life, love often takes a back seat to more urgent things. Deadlines, paychecks, social status. We say, I'll spend more time with my kids when work slows down. I'll call my friend when things aren't so hectic. I'll be more present when I have less on my plate. But life doesn't wait for our schedules to clear. The moments that matter most are fleeting, slipping quietly through our fingers while we're busy looking elsewhere. Anna knew this. She had spent so many years chasing the illusion of balance, trying to be everything to everyone, spreading herself thin across responsibilities and expectations. But in those final weeks, as her body grew weaker, she realized something simple yet profound. Love is not something you schedule, it's something you give here and now. When Anna closed her eyes for the last time, James was still holding her hand. She didn't leave him a fortune. She didn't leave him a detailed roadmap for life. But she left him with love. Love that would echo in his memories. In the bedtime stories she read to him. In the way she laughed at his jokes, even when they weren't funny. In the gentle way she wiped away his tears when he scraped his knee. That love would become his anchor, his guiding light. Because love doesn't end when someone leaves. It lives on in the spaces they once occupied, in the hearts they once touched. What are we investing in? We invest time, energy, and attention into so many things. Careers, achievements, appearances. But how often do we stop and ask, am I investing in love? Am I showing up for the people who matter? Am I giving my time to what will outlast me? Love doesn't require perfection. It doesn't need grand gestures or flawless timing. It just needs presence. Anna's final words to James weren't about regret, guilt, or fear. They were about love. And love doesn't belong just in grand, climactic moments. It belongs in the everyday. In the way we listen when someone speaks. In the way we put down our phones and look someone in the eyes. In the way we say, I'm sorry, I forgive you, and I love you without hesitation. Every day, every interaction, is an opportunity to choose love over distraction. Are we investing our time and energy in love, or are we distracted by lesser things? Ask yourself, when was the last time I said, I love you, without assuming there would always be another chance? Am I prioritizing love in my daily life, or am I letting distractions steal my attention? If I were at the end of my life, would I be proud of the way I loved? The currency of life isn't money, status, or possessions. It's love. And the beautiful thing about love is that we can always choose to give more of it, starting right now. After Anna's funeral, James kept one of her scarves, the soft lavender one she used to wear on rainy days. He held it close on nights when he missed her most. But he didn't just hold on to her scarf, he held on to her love. It shaped the way he treated others, the way he forgave quickly, the way he said, I love you, every time he left someone's side. Because Anna had taught him something sacred. In the end, love is all that remains. And perhaps love is all that ever truly mattered. The sacred is waiting, not in wealth, not in status, but in the quiet, persistent gift of love. Are you investing in what truly matters? Are you spending your love freely, without hesitation? Start today. Start now. Chapter 7. The Beauty of Letting Go. We cling to so much, relationships, possessions, expectations, control, as if holding on tightly will keep them from slipping away. But life, by its very nature, is fleeting. And the beauty of impermanence isn't in trying to stop the river from flowing, but in learning to float with it. The elderly man and the river. The bench faced a wide, slow-moving river. The surface shimmered in the late afternoon sun, golden ripples dancing along the current. Leaves floated on the water, carried effortlessly downstream. Walter sat on the bench, his cane propped beside him, his hat casting a shadow over his wrinkled face. His hands rested lightly on his knees, veins like fine blue threads beneath thin skin. He came to this spot often, a quiet refuge on the edge of the world where time seemed to slow down. For most of his life, Walter had been a man who held on. He held on to his career, working late into the nights and weekends, determined to climb every rung of the corporate ladder. He held on to expectations, for himself and for others, believing that success was measured in precision and predictability. He held on to relationships, often squeezing so tightly that he drove people away with his fear of losing them. He had believed that control was the answer to his fears, that if he just planned well enough, worked hard enough, or held tight enough, nothing would fall apart. But life doesn't follow plans. Life doesn't respond well to clenched fists. The cracks had appeared slowly: his wife's illness, his daughter's rebellion, the company restructuring that left him without a job at 55. Each time he tried to tighten his grip, life found a way to slip through his fingers like water. And it wasn't until his wife's funeral, as he stood at her graveside with trembling hands, that Walter realized the truth. I can't control this. I can't hold on to everything. And maybe I'm not supposed to. We live under the illusion that if we plan, prepare, and hold on tightly enough, we can prevent loss, pain, or change. We cling to routines because they give us a sense of safety. We cling to people because we're afraid of being alone. We cling to possessions because they make us feel secure. But control is a slippery thing. Relationships evolve. Bodies age. Careers shift. Seasons change. Trying to control life is like trying to hold water in our hands. The tighter we squeeze, the faster it slips away. Walter had spent years fighting the river, trying to force it to flow in a straight line, trying to dam it with plans and expectations. But rivers aren't meant to be controlled. They're meant to be flowed with. At first glance, impermanence feels cruel. The people we love won't always be here. The things we treasure will fade, break, or disappear. The moments we cherish will pass into memory. But impermanence isn't a curse, it's a gift. It's what makes things precious. Sunsets wouldn't be breathtaking if they lasted forever. Laughter wouldn't echo in our hearts if it wasn't fleeting. Love wouldn't feel like magic if it wasn't fragile. Impermanence reminds us to be here now. It reminds us to say I love you while we can. Hold hands a little longer. Savor the taste of coffee, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of someone's voice. Because everything, every moment, every breath, every connection is temporary. And that's what makes it sacred. Walter realized something as he sat by the river that day. Holding on had made him heavy. Heavy with fear of loss. Heavy with resentment when things didn't go according to plan. Heavy with regret for the moments he had missed because he was too busy trying to control them. Letting go isn't giving up. It's surrendering. Not in defeat, but in trust. Trust that life will continue to flow, with or without our permission. Trust that loss doesn't erase love. Trust that beauty exists not in permanence, but in presence. Letting go isn't about apathy or indifference. It's about freedom. It's letting go of the need to control every outcome. It's releasing the tight grip we have on people, knowing we can love them without owning them. It's allowing ourselves to experience joy without trying to make it last forever. Walter thought about his daughter, who he hadn't spoken to in years because of an argument he could barely remember. He realized he was holding on to his pride, to his sense of being right. But what if he let go? What if he reached out, not with expectations, but with love? Letting go isn't something we do once. It's something we practice, over and over again. Letting go of grudges that weigh us down. Letting go of expectations that set us up for disappointment. Letting go of the idea that we can stop time from moving forward. When we stop clinging, something surprising happens. We become lighter. Walter closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the river. It didn't fight. It didn't resist. It just flowed. And somewhere deep in his chest, Walter felt something loosen, a knot that had been tied for decades. What would we release if we truly understood that everything is temporary? Ask yourself, what am I holding on to that's weighing me down? Who or what am I afraid of losing? And how is that fear shaping my choices? What would it feel like to surrender, to trust the flow instead of fighting it? Impermanence isn't a threat, it's an invitation. To love deeply, knowing that love is a fleeting gift. To show up fully, knowing that time is finite. To let go gracefully, knowing that nothing truly belongs to us. Walter stood up from the bench, gripping his cane for support. He felt lighter somehow, as if the river had carried away some invisible weight from his shoulders. That night, he wrote a letter to his daughter. He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He simply said, "I'm sorry. I love you. Please call me if you can. As he sealed the envelope, he realized something. Letting go doesn't mean losing. It means trusting. Trusting that life, like the river, knows where it's going. And sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let it carry us. The sacred is waiting, not in clinging, but in surrender. What are you holding on to that you might release? And how might letting go make space for something new to flow in? Chapter 8. Finding Joy in the Small Things. Life doesn't always deliver grand moments of happiness wrapped in ribbons and fireworks. Often, its beauty hides in the smallest, quietest details. A glimmer of light through a leaf, the sound of birdsong at dawn, the warmth of a hand held tightly. These are the moments that sustain us, if only we stop long enough to notice them. The woman and the birdsong. The hospice room was small but filled with soft light from the window overlooking a modest garden. The curtains billowed gently in the afternoon breeze, carrying with them the faint scent of lavender. Margaret lay propped up on her pillows, a warm blanket tucked around her shoulders. Outside, birds chattered and sang, their melodies weaving through the open window like threads of gold in the stillness of the room. She closed her eyes and listened. For a moment, the pain in her body faded. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed distant. All that existed was this: the rise and fall of her breath, the weight of the blanket on her legs, and the pure, crystalline sound of birdsong filling the air. It felt like a secret, like the world had paused just for her, just for this moment. A tear slipped down Margaret's cheek, not from sadness, but from gratitude. Gratitude for this small, perfect moment. She had spent so much of her life rushing, juggling tasks, worrying about things beyond her control, always moving toward the next milestone. But here, now, with time running out and the noise of the world fading away, she realized something she had missed all those years. The small things weren't small at all. They were everything. We live in a world that celebrates big moments. Promotions, achievements, grand gestures of romance. But life isn't made of big moments. It's made of small ones. The first sip of hot coffee in the morning. The way sunlight dances on the wall through a curtain. The sound of rain tapping against the roof as you fall asleep. These are the moments that often slip past us unnoticed. We tell ourselves they're ordinary, unremarkable. But when everything else falls away, when we're faced with the fragility of time, these are the moments we long for. Margaret didn't want another meeting, another paycheck, another round of applause. She wanted more mornings listening to birdsong, more sunsets watched slowly, without checking her phone, more laughter shared over simple meals. The profound is often hidden in the ordinary. We just have to see it. We don't miss life's small joys because they aren't there. We miss them because we're not looking. We're busy. We're distracted. We're waiting for something bigger, something more impressive. We tell ourselves that joy is something we'll feel when we finally get there. When we get the promotion, when we buy the house, when we have the perfect relationship. But there is a moving target, and while we're running toward it, the small, quiet miracles of here pass us by unnoticed. Margaret realized that joy doesn't live in the extraordinary. It lives in the present, in the spaces where we slow down enough to notice. The smell of freshly baked bread, the feeling of cool sheets on a warm night, the sound of a loved one's voice saying, "Good night." Joy isn't something we find, it's something we notice. It's already here, woven into the fabric of our daily lives, waiting patiently for us to pay attention. But noticing is a practice. It means slowing down. It means setting aside distractions. It means allowing ourselves to be fully present in the small, fleeting moments of our day. When was the last time you truly noticed the taste of your food, or the feeling of the sun on your face, or the sound of birdsong outside your window? These are the tiny, sacred details of life, the details we'll miss most when they're gone. The small things remind us of what's real. They remind us that joy doesn't require perfection, that beauty doesn't need to be loud, that the most meaningful moments are often the simplest. Margaret didn't need a miracle cure or an extravagant farewell. She needed this moment, this tiny, perfect moment of listening to birds sing outside her window. In that moment, her life felt full. Not because it was without pain or loss, but because she had allowed herself to be here, fully, in the present. The beauty of life's small moments is that they are fleeting. The birdsong fades. The coffee grows cold. The sunset sinks below the horizon. but their impermanence is what makes them precious. We don't need to hoard them, capture them, or cling to them. We just need to experience them, to let them wash over us, to let them fill us up, to let them remind us of the quiet magic of simply being alive. How often do we pause to notice the ordinary miracles around us? Ask yourself, when was the last time I felt fully present in a small, quiet moment? What are the small, daily joys I overlook because I'm too busy or distracted? What would happen if I started noticing them, one by one? The small things aren't insignificant. They're where life happens. They're where joy lives. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Margaret closed her eyes and let herself drift into sleep. The birds continued to sing outside her window, their notes soft and golden in the fading light. She didn't try to hold on to the moment. She didn't wish for more. She simply let it be. And in that stillness, in that quiet gratitude, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Because joy isn't in chasing more, it's in noticing what's already here. The sacred is waiting, not in grand moments, but in the small, fleeting details of ordinary life. Can you pause, even for a moment today, and let yourself notice the quiet miracles all around you? Chapter 9. Gratitude in the Final Hours. Gratitude isn't about denying hardship or pretending everything is perfect. It's about opening our eyes to what remains, to the light, the love, the small, fleeting gifts that persist even in life's most fragile moments. Gratitude doesn't change our circumstances. It changes us, the man and the list. The hospital room was bathed in soft afternoon light, filtered through sheer white curtains. Outside, the faint hum of traffic mixed with the sound of birds singing somewhere in the distance. George lay in his bed, propped up by pillows, a small notebook resting on his lap. His breathing was slow and deliberate, each inhale and exhale a conscious act. He had asked the nurse for a pen and paper earlier that morning. "Are you writing to someone?" she had asked gently. "No," he said, shaking his head with a faint smile. "I'm writing to something, to life." Now, as the hours stretched long and the world outside carried on without him, George began to write. The warmth of sunlight on my face. The smell of fresh bread in the morning. The sound of my daughter's laughter when she was 5. The feel of sand beneath my feet at the beach. The way my wife's hand felt in mine on our wedding day. He paused, his hand trembling slightly as he rested the pen on the paper. How many moments like these had he overlooked in the rush of life? How many treasures had he failed to notice because he was too busy chasing more money, more success, more validation? Now, in these final hours, it was the smallest things he held onto most tightly. They were the things he was most grateful for, the details, the textures, the fleeting moments that had made his life his. Gratitude has a way of shifting our focus from what's missing to what's here. It doesn't erase pain. It doesn't eliminate fear. But it softens the sharp edges of suffering. Gratitude doesn't cure illness, but it helps us cherish the moments of clarity between the waves of pain. Gratitude doesn't erase loss, but it reminds us of the love that came before it. Gratitude doesn't stop time, but it allows us to feel time, to savor it, even as it slips through our fingers. George didn't have the energy to fight against his reality anymore, but he did have the energy to notice, to see the light streaming through the curtains, to feel the coolness of the water as he sipped from his glass, to remember the way his dog used to curl up beside him on cold nights. Gratitude gave him a way to say goodbye, not with bitterness, but with grace. Gratitude isn't always easy. It's hard to feel grateful when life feels unfair. It's hard to feel grateful when we're in pain, when we're grieving, when the future feels uncertain. It's hard to feel grateful when our minds are fixated on what's missing. But gratitude isn't about denying those feelings. It's about letting them coexist with thankfulness. You can grieve and still be grateful. You can hurt and still be grateful. You can fear the end and still be grateful for this moment. Gratitude doesn't erase the hard parts of life. It helps us hold them with more tenderness. Gratitude is a practice, not a destination. It's not a feeling we stumble upon by accident. It's something we choose. It's the choice to notice the warmth of a cup of tea in your hands. It's the choice to pause and appreciate the sound of rain on your roof. It's the choice to say, thank you. Even on ordinary days, even in difficult moments. George's list wasn't filled with extraordinary moments. It was filled with ordinary miracles. The smell of his mother's perfume, the feeling of grass beneath his bare feet, the sound of a friend's uncontrollable laughter. Gratitude doesn't require grand gestures. It requires attention. Gratitude reveals what we might otherwise overlook. That time spent with loved ones is more valuable than any promotion. That the beauty of a sunset can feel like a gift if we pause long enough to see it. That even in pain, there are moments of peace. It's easy to think of gratitude as something we express when life feels good, when the sun is shining, when things are going our way. But true gratitude shows up in the ordinary, the messy, the imperfect. It's not reserved for special occasions. It's available in every moment. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, George set his pen down and closed his notebook. His list was short, but it was enough. The nurse returned and found him gazing out the window, a faint smile on his lips. "Are you okay, George?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I am. I really am." And he was. Not because his circumstances had changed, they hadn't, but because gratitude had changed him. It had turned these final hours into something sacred. Not just an ending, but a thank you. A thank you to life, to love, to the fleeting beauty of being here at all. How can we cultivate gratitude in our everyday lives? Ask yourself, what small moments do I overlook in my daily life? What am I grateful for right now, in this moment? How can I make gratitude a daily practice, rather than an occasional feeling? Gratitude isn't something we find, it's something we choose. And we can choose it every day. By writing down 3 things we're thankful for each night. By pausing to notice the small joys that surround us. By saying, thank you, to others, to ourselves, to life itself. As night fell, the nurse dimmed the lights in George's room. The faint glow of the sunset spilled across his bed, painting the sheets in soft hues of orange and gold. His list sat on the table beside him, a fragile but powerful testament to a life well lived. Not because it was perfect, but because it was noticed. George closed his eyes and let out a long, soft breath. "Thank you," he whispered into the fading light. "Thank you for all of it. The sacred is waiting, not in grand achievements, but in the small, fleeting details of ordinary life. Can you pause today and find one thing, just one, to be grateful for? Start there. Start now." Chapter 10. Courage over Comfort. The edge of life has a way of sharpening our focus. It strips away excuses, fear, and the illusion of endless tomorrows. And in that clarity, one question remains. Did I truly live? Not just exist, not just survive, but live with courage, with purpose, and with a heart wide open to the unknown. The woman and the window. Evelyn sat by the window of her hospice room, staring out at the world she had watched from a distance her entire life. Outside, people hurried along the sidewalk, lost in their routines. Coffee cups in hand, briefcases swinging at their sides, faces illuminated by phone screens. For years, she had been like them, moving through life in straight lines, never veering too far off course, never stepping outside the boundaries of what felt safe. Evelyn had always been a woman who played by the rules. She chose practicality over passion. She stayed in jobs she didn't love because they felt secure. She held back her words, her dreams, and her desires because she feared rejection and failure. But now, with the steady tick of the clock beside her, Evelyn realized something painful. She had lived her life in a cage of her own making. A cage built not of steel, but of fear. Fear of failing. Fear of embarrassment. Fear of stepping outside the comforting predictability of routine. She had always assumed there would be more time, another day, another year, another chance to be brave. But now, the window she had been staring out of was no longer just a piece of glass. It was a mirror. And in it, Evelyn saw a woman who had been alive, but not truly living. Comfort zones are seductive. They promise safety, predictability, and a life free of failure. But they also come with a cost. Growth stagnates. Dreams shrink. Life becomes smaller, quieter, and increasingly gray. Comfort zones aren't inherently bad. They serve a purpose. They're where we rest, where we heal, where we recover from life's storms. But we aren't meant to live there. Evelyn realized that comfort had become her prison. She had stayed in relationships that didn't nourish her because leaving felt scary. She had silenced her opinions in meetings because speaking up felt risky. She had put off her dream of traveling to Italy because it felt too extravagant, too indulgent. And now, the time for those dreams was running out. There's a hidden cost to playing it safe: regret. The regret of never trying. The regret of never saying, "I love you," when the moment was right. The regret of watching life happen from the sidelines instead of stepping onto the field. Evelyn had spent decades avoiding discomfort. But the thing about discomfort is that it's temporary. Regret, on the other hand, is a slow, heavy ache that lingers long after the moment has passed. Courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and taking action anyway. It's having the hard conversation even though your voice shakes. It's saying yes to an opportunity that terrifies you. It's stepping into the unknown without a guarantee of success. Evelyn realized something important as she sat by the window. Courage doesn't always look grand. Sometimes it's a whisper instead of a roar. Sometimes it's a single step instead of a giant leap. Sometimes it's as simple and as difficult as saying, "I want something more." Evelyn didn't have years left, but she had now. And in this moment, she made a decision. I will not let fear have the final word. She picked up a notebook and began to write. She wrote letters to people she had wronged and asked for forgiveness. She wrote down dreams she had buried deep inside herself. She wrote about the things she would have done differently and the things she was proud of. And then she made a request to her nurse. "I want to sit outside," she said. "I want to feel the sun on my face. I want to listen to the wind. I want to be there, outside these walls." The nurse wheeled Evelyn into the hospice garden that afternoon. She sat there, wrapped in a warm blanket, her face turned up to the sky, her eyes closed. For the first time in years, Evelyn wasn't hiding. She wasn't playing small. She wasn't worrying about how she looked or what others might think. She was simply being. Fully. Freely. Fearlessly. It's easy to tell ourselves that courage is for other people. For the adventurous, the bold, the risk-takers. But courage isn't a personality trait. It's a choice. A choice we make every time we speak our truth, follow our passions, step outside what feels safe and familiar. And here's the secret. Fear doesn't go away when we act courageously. It comes with us. But when we take that first step, when we act in spite of our fear, it gets quieter. And what takes its place is something far more powerful: freedom. What would we do if we weren't afraid of failing? Ask yourself, what would I try if I wasn't afraid of failing? What conversations am I avoiding because they feel uncomfortable? What's one small act of courage I can take today? Courage doesn't mean diving headfirst into the unknown. Sometimes it's just dipping your toes into the water. But every step matters. Every moment of bravery chips away at the walls of fear until one day, you realize you're no longer trapped, you're free. Evelyn returned to her room that evening, tired but at peace. The sun was setting outside her window, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. She watched it with a quiet reverence, knowing that this might be the last sunset she would see. But it wasn't a sad moment, it was a full moment. Because Evelyn had chosen courage. She had stepped out of her comfort zone, if only for an afternoon, and it had changed everything. The sacred is waiting, not in safety, not in perfection, but in the brave, messy, beautiful act of showing up fully for our lives. What would you do if you weren't afraid of failing? Start there. Start now. Chapter 11. The Art of Saying Yes. Life isn't a single grand yes. It's a series of small ones. Every yes shapes our path. Every yes writes our story. But fear, doubt, and hesitation often keep us from saying yes to the very moments that could change everything. The man and the missed opportunities. The afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across the hospice room floor. Richard sat propped up by pillows, his thin hands resting lightly on a faded photo album. His breath came slow and shallow, his once booming voice now a fragile rasp. "Do you know what I regret most?" he asked the nurse who sat quietly by his bedside. She looked at him with gentle eyes and waited. "It's not the things I did," he continued, his voice trembling. "It's the things I didn't do. The times I said no when I should have said yes." Richard's gaze drifted to the photo album resting on his lap. He flipped it open with shaky fingers, pausing at a photograph of a younger version of himself, standing at an airport terminal with a ticket clutched in his hand. I had a chance to move to Italy when I was 30. A job offer. A fresh start. The nurse leaned closer, listening intently. But I said no. I told myself it wasn't practical, that I wasn't ready, that I'd go someday. He let out a small, tired laugh. Someday never came. Richard turned another page, landing on a photograph of a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. Her name was Claire. I met her at a friend's wedding. We talked all night. I felt alive. But I let her walk away without asking for her number. I thought, if it's meant to be, we'll meet again. They never did. Richard's voice grew softer as he closed the photo album. So many moments. So many opportunities to say yes. But I let fear, doubt, and hesitation build walls around me. And now, here I am, on this bed, at the end of it all, wondering what might have been if I'd been just a little braver. The power of yes. Life is a series of invitations. An invitation to love. An invitation to adventure. An invitation to risk. An invitation to be fully, unapologetically alive. Every invitation comes with a choice, yes or no. But saying yes isn't easy. Yes requires vulnerability. Yes means stepping into the unknown. Yes comes with the risk of failure, rejection, and loss. It's safer to say no. No keeps us in familiar spaces. No keeps us from being hurt. No keeps us from feeling exposed. But no also keeps us from living. Richard's story isn't unique. Many of us are holding on to a list of moments where we chose safety over possibility, hesitation over action. And yet every great story, every love, every adventure, every triumph begins with a single word, yes. The fear behind no. Why do we say no when our hearts are whispering yes? Because saying yes feels risky. What if I fail? What if I embarrass myself? What if I lose something valuable? But behind every fear, there's a deeper question. What if I don't? What if I never write the book? What if I never take that trip? What if I never tell them how I feel? Fear is a thief, but it's a quiet one. It steals our chances, our stories, our possibilities, not all at once, but moment by moment, opportunity by opportunity. Richard realized too late that yes doesn't have to come with certainty. It just has to come with courage. The truth is, our lives are shaped not just by the choices we make, but by the ones we avoid. The job offer we turned down because it felt too risky. The relationship we let fade because vulnerability was too uncomfortable. The creative project we never started because we feared it wouldn't be perfect. But the weight of missed opportunities doesn't always feel heavy at first. It accumulates slowly, quietly, until one day we look back and realize our life feels smaller than it should. Richard understood that now. He couldn't change the past, but he hoped his story might help someone else make a different choice. Saying yes doesn't guarantee success, but it does guarantee growth. Saying yes to love means risking heartbreak, but it also means experiencing connection. Saying yes to adventure means risking discomfort, but it also means discovering something new. Saying yes to creativity means risking failure, but it also means leaving a mark on the world. Saying yes isn't about being reckless, it's about being alive. It's about looking at an opportunity, a moment, a person, and choosing to step forward instead of stepping back. It's about being able to look back at your life and say, I didn't play it safe. I didn't let fear win. I said yes. Saying yes doesn't always mean grand gestures or life-changing decisions. Sometimes, saying yes looks like saying yes to spending an afternoon with your child instead of answering emails. Saying yes to a spontaneous road trip. Saying yes to telling someone how much they mean to you. Life isn't made of a single big yes. It's made of 1,000 small ones. Are we saying yes to what truly matters? Ask yourself, when was the last time I said yes to something that scared me? What am I saying no to because it feels uncomfortable or uncertain? If I only had a short time left, what would I regret not saying yes to? Saying yes doesn't mean eliminating fear. It means acting anyway. It means trusting that the risk of regret is far greater than the risk of failure. In his final days, Richard wrote one more letter, a letter to his grandson. Dear Henry, say yes. Say yes to love, to adventure, to the things that make your heart beat faster. Say yes even when it's scary, even when you're not sure if it will work out. Because in the end, you'll regret the chances you didn't take far more than the ones you did. With love, Grandpa. He set down his pen and closed his eyes, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. For the first time in years, Richard felt light. Because even in the final stretch of life, he had chosen to say yes. Yes to reflection, yes to vulnerability, yes to leaving something behind that mattered. The sacred is waiting, not in avoiding risk, but in embracing the unknown. Are you saying yes to the things that truly matter? Start small. Start brave. Start now. Chapter 12. Forgiveness as Liberation. Forgiveness isn't about condoning what happened. It isn't about erasing the past or pretending the hurt wasn't real. Forgiveness is about freedom, freeing ourselves from the weight of resentment, the prison of anger, and the burden of carrying a past we cannot change. The siblings and the hospital room. The hospital room was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Machines beeped steadily in the background, their rhythms a stark reminder of time passing, ticking down in moments they could not reclaim. Mark sat in a chair beside the hospital bed, his hands clasped tightly together, knuckles pale. His sister Julia lay still beneath a thin hospital blanket, her breathing slow and labored. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. 5 years of silence. 5 years of unsaid words. 5 years of stubborn pride and unresolved anger. It had started with something small, a misunderstanding, a misplaced word. But small things have a way of growing sharp edges when left unchecked. Now here they were. Mark's eyes welled with tears as he looked at his sister. The person who used to braid his hair when they were children, who used to hold his hand when he was scared, who used to share secrets in whispers after the lights went out. How had they let it get this far? Julia stirred slightly, her eyes flickering open. For a moment, she looked at him with confusion, and then recognition. "Mark," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark leaned closer, his voice trembling. "I'm here, Jules. I'm here." There was a long silence, a silence heavy with everything unsaid. "I'm sorry," Julia said finally, her voice breaking. The words hit Mark like a wave. Not because they were dramatic, not because they changed the past, but because they broke something open inside him, something he had been holding on to for far too long. "I'm sorry too," he said, his voice catching. They didn't rehash the details of their fight. They didn't dissect who was right and who was wrong. Because, in the end, none of that mattered. What mattered was this moment, this fragile, fleeting chance to let go, to forgive, to find peace. Mark took his sister's hand in his, and for the first time in years, they sat together in silence, not divided by resentment, but united by forgiveness. Resentment is heavy. It sits in our chests like a stone. It colors our relationships, our choices, and our peace. It chains us to the past, keeping us stuck in moments we can't change. We tell ourselves that holding on to anger is a form of justice, that it keeps us safe, that it protects us from being hurt again. But in reality, resentment doesn't protect us. It poisons us. It steals our joy. It clouds our perspective. It makes us prisoners to someone else's actions or words. Mark had carried that weight for 5 years, convinced that his anger was righteous, that it was his shield. But as he sat beside his sister, watching her fragile breath rise and fall, he realized the truth. Resentment hadn't protected him. It had trapped him. Forgiveness is often misunderstood. It's not about saying what happened was okay. It's not about forgetting or minimizing the pain. It's not about letting someone back into your life if they're not safe to have there. Forgiveness is about freedom. It's about saying, "I will no longer carry this weight. I will no longer let this moment define me. I will no longer let my past steal my present." Forgiveness is not for the other person, it's for you. It's the act of cutting the invisible cord that ties you to pain, anger, and resentment. It's reclaiming your peace. It's choosing yourself. Forgiving isn't easy. It feels vulnerable. It feels unfair. It feels like letting someone off the hook. But forgiveness isn't about them. It's about you. It's about releasing the grip resentment has on your heart. Julia and Mark could have spent their final moments together arguing over who was right and who was wrong. But they chose something else. They chose peace. They chose each other. And in doing so, they gave themselves a gift they had been withholding for years. Sometimes, the hardest person to forgive is ourselves. For the mistakes we made. For the words we didn't say. For the chances we missed. Self-forgiveness is an act of courage. It's looking at our past selves, the flawed, scared, messy versions of us, and saying, I see you. I forgive you. You were doing the best you could with what you knew. Mark realized, sitting beside Julia, that part of his resentment wasn't just directed at her. It was directed at himself, for letting so much time pass, for not reaching out sooner, for waiting until it was almost too late. But forgiveness has a way of softening even the sharpest edges. In forgiving his sister and himself, Mark felt something he hadn't felt in years: lightness. Forgiveness isn't just an emotional act, it's a physical one. It's unclenching fists that have been tight for too long. It's releasing shoulders that have been carrying too much weight. It's letting breath move freely again in a chest that's been locked with tension. Forgiveness is liberation. It doesn't erase the past, but it allows us to step into the present, free, unburdened, and whole. Who or what do we need to forgive to fully live? Ask yourself, who am I holding resentment against, and how is it affecting my peace? What would it feel like to let go of that resentment? Do I need to forgive myself for something? Forgiveness doesn't require the other person's participation. It doesn't require an apology or a grand reconciliation. It simply requires you, your willingness to release, to soften, to let go. As dawn broke through the hospital window, Julia's breathing slowed. Mark held her hand tightly, tears slipping down his face. There was no anger left, no resentment, no unsaid words. There was only love. And when Julia's final breath came, soft and fleeting, it carried with it something sacred: freedom. Mark sat there for a long time, the weight in his chest replaced by a deep, aching peace. He had forgiven. He had let go. And in doing so, he had found something he didn't know he was missing: himself. The sacred is waiting, not in holding on, but in letting go. Who or what do you need to forgive to free yourself from the weight of resentment? Start small. Start gently. Start now. Chapter 13. Time is the real treasure. Time is the one thing we can never earn more of, never store away for later, and never truly own. Yet we spend it so carelessly, on distractions, on obligations that drain us, on chasing things we can't take with us. But in the final hours, the truth becomes clear. Time was always the treasure, and how we spent it was always the story. The grandfather and the stories. The house was quiet except for the faint ticking of an antique clock in the corner. Sunlight poured through lace curtains, illuminating floating dust particles in golden beams. The scent of freshly baked bread lingered in the air, mixing with the faint smell of lavender from a nearby vase. Henry sat in his armchair, a knitted blanket draped over his knees. His grandchildren, Ella, age 8, and Ben, age 10, were sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of him, wide-eyed and attentive. His daughter had asked him earlier that morning if he wanted to rest, maybe lie down and save his energy. But Henry had shaken his head gently. Time is short, he'd said softly, and I'd rather spend it with them. So there he sat, with two pairs of curious eyes fixed on him and time ticking softly in the background. Did I ever tell you about the time I built a treehouse in the old oak tree out back? Henry began, his voice raspy but steady. The children shook their heads eagerly. For hours, Henry spoke, his voice weaving stories from his childhood, his adventures as a young man, and the tender moments of raising their mother. He laughed with them. He paused when they asked questions. He held their attention not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with presence. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the room, but Henry didn't stop. Because in this moment, he wasn't counting minutes or worrying about unfinished tasks. He was living. Time is the most democratic resource we have. Everyone gets the same 24 hours in a day. Everyone is subject to the relentless ticking of the clock. No one, not kings, not billionaires, not artists, can buy more of it. But while time is universal, how we spend it is deeply personal. Do we spend it on connection, or do we let relationships wither in neglect? Do we spend it on experiences, or do we hoard it, waiting for a perfect moment? Do we spend it intentionally, or do we let it slip through our fingers unnoticed? Henry had once been a man who spent his time on things. Long hours at work, an ever-growing to-do list, chasing promotions and climbing invisible ladders. But in the stillness of his final days, he realized something. The most valuable moments of his life weren't the ones he spent chasing deadlines or accumulating wealth. They were the moments he spent being there, for his children, for his wife, for the small, fleeting moments that made life real. We live as though time is something we can store away. I'll make time for my family next weekend. I'll take that vacation next year. I'll start pursuing my passion when things calm down. But time doesn't wait. The days roll into weeks. The weeks roll into months. And before we know it, the years have slipped through our fingers like sand. Henry had spent too many years trading moments for productivity, trading presence for efficiency. But now, in the golden light of a slow afternoon, he saw the truth. Time isn't something to manage, it's something to cherish. In the end, it's not the hours on the clock we'll remember. It's the moments. The way it felt to hold someone's hand during a hard day. The quiet laughter shared over a simple meal. The weight of a child asleep on your chest. Time isn't about how much we have, it's about how we fill it. Henry didn't have years left, but he had this afternoon. And he was spending it exactly as he wanted. Sharing stories, creating memories, and filling the air with love. We often tell ourselves that later will be the perfect time to start truly living. Later, when we have more money. Later, when we have more time. Later, when we feel more ready. But later is a mirage. Later isn't promised. Henry had learned this lesson in the hardest way. Watching friends pass away, watching his wife slip away, and now feeling his own body grow weaker by the day. But instead of mourning the time he had lost, he chose to savor the time he had left. Time well spent isn't always loud or eventful. Sometimes it's sitting quietly with someone you love, listening, really listening, to someone's story, watching the sun rise without rushing into the day. Time well spent isn't measured in productivity. It's measured in presence. Are we spending our time on what truly matters? Ask yourself, how am I spending my time? Do my actions reflect my priorities? If I knew my time was limited, what would I do differently? The clock is ticking, not as a threat, but as a reminder. A reminder that every moment is a chance to choose. Connection over distraction. Presence over productivity. Love over obligation. As twilight settled over the house, Henry's voice grew softer. The children had fallen asleep, their heads resting against each other, their breathing slow and even. Henry looked at them and felt a profound sense of peace. He had given them something that no inheritance could match, his time. The nurse entered quietly, glancing at the sleeping children and then back at Henry. "They'll remember this day forever," she said softly. Henry smiled faintly, his eyes twinkling with warmth. "I hope so," he whispered, "because I know I will." In the end, Henry didn't leave behind stacks of money or valuable possessions. He left behind stories. He left behind laughter. He left behind afternoons bathed in golden light and hearts filled with love. Time is the real treasure, and how we spend it determines what we leave behind. The sacred is waiting, not in more hours, but in how we fill the ones we have. Are you spending your time on what truly matters? If not, what small change can you make today to start? Start small. Start fully. Start now. Chapter 14. Death as a Teacher, Not an Enemy. We spend so much of our lives running from death, avoiding it, fearing it, refusing to talk about it. But death isn't just an end, it's also a teacher. If we let it, it can show us how to live fully, honestly, and without regret. The nurse and the quiet lessons. The hospice ward was silent except for the faint hum of monitors and the muffled footsteps of nurses moving from room to room. The air carried the faint scent of antiseptic and lavender, an attempt to soften the sterile atmosphere with something warm and familiar. Emily stood at the window of the staff room, her eyes following the slow descent of the sun beyond the horizon. She had been a hospice nurse for over 15 years, and in that time, she had seen hundreds of people cross the threshold between life and death. Each passing had left something behind, a whisper of wisdom, a fragment of truth, a quiet echo of clarity. She often thought about the first patient she had cared for, a woman in her early 50s who had been terrified of dying. "Why is this happening to me?" the woman had asked repeatedly, her voice trembling with fear. Emily had held her hand and listened, but she had no answers then. She had been young, inexperienced, and afraid herself. But over the years, something had shifted in Emily. Death had stopped being an enemy. It had become a teacher. She had learned that death, when faced honestly, doesn't just mark an end, It shines a light on what really matters. Our fear of death. In our culture, we talk about death in hushed tones, if we talk about it at all. We avoid the subject at dinner tables. We cling to youth and hide signs of aging. We treat death like a failure, something to fight against rather than something to prepare for. But death isn't something we can avoid. It's not an if, it's a when. And yet, we live as if we'll have forever. We postpone our dreams. We leave words unsaid. We assume there will always be more time. Emily had seen it over and over. When people finally stopped fighting death, they often found something surprising: peace. Not because death was easy or painless, but because acceptance allowed them to focus on what was left. Death has a way of holding up a mirror to our lives. It asks us if we've been honest with ourselves and others. It asks if we've loved fully and fiercely. It asks if we've used our time well or let it slip through our fingers. When death is close, the noise of life fades away, the emails, the to-do lists, the social media scrolls. And in that silence, clarity emerges. What did I do with my time? Did I love enough? Did I forgive enough? Did I truly live? Emily had witnessed this moment of clarity in countless eyes, in countless final breaths. And every time, she wondered, why do we wait until the end to ask these questions? Death has lessons to teach, if we're willing to listen. Life is fragile. Every moment is precious because none of them are guaranteed. Regret hurts more than failure. It's better to try and fail than to never try at all. Love is the only thing that lasts. In the end, people don't talk about money, titles, or possessions. They talk about love. The present is all we have. The past is gone, and the future isn't promised. Now is the only time we truly own. Acceptance brings peace. Fighting against reality only causes suffering. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go. Emily had learned these lessons not from books or theories, but from sitting at bedsides, holding hands, and listening to final words whispered into the quiet. Most of us live in denial of death until it's right in front of us. But what if we didn't? What if we accepted death as an inevitable part of being alive? What if we let the reality of our mortality guide our choices instead of paralyzing us? What if we stopped fearing death and started learning from it? When we accept death, we stop living in the future and start living now. We stop chasing immortality through money, fame, or achievements, and we start seeking meaning in small moments. A shared smile, a heartfelt conversation, a quiet morning with someone we love. Emily had seen people who resisted death until their final breath, and she had seen people who met it with open arms. And there was always one difference between them: acceptance. The dying have a unique clarity, a wisdom that comes from seeing the edge of everything. Emily had learned more from her patients than from any textbook or seminar. From the father who regretted working too much and missing his daughter's childhood. From the woman who forgave herself in her final hours after carrying guilt for decades. From the teenager who, despite being terminally ill, spent her last days laughing and loving fiercely. They were her teachers, and their lessons were simple. Don't wait. Love now. Forgive now. Be here, fully and completely. What would happen if we stopped fearing death and started learning from it? Ask yourself, what would I do differently if I truly understood that my time is finite? Who would I call, forgive, or hold closer? What fears would I release if I accepted that life is temporary? Death isn't the opposite of life. It's a part of it. And instead of running from it, we can let it remind us to. Live honestly. Love deeply. Let go of what doesn't matter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stepped outside the hospice ward and felt the cool evening air against her face. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Death wasn't something she feared anymore. It wasn't an enemy. It was a teacher. One that reminded her, every single day, that life isn't about avoiding death. It's about showing up fully until the very last moment. Emily turned her face toward the sky and whispered softly, "Thank you. Thank you for the lessons. Thank you for the reminders. Thank you for the chance to live." The sacred is waiting, not in avoiding death, but in letting its lessons guide us into deeper, fuller living. What would change if you stopped fearing death and started listening to what it has to teach? Start small. Start bravely. Start now. Conclusion: living before we die. We all know, somewhere deep inside, that our time here is finite. Yet we live as though we're immortal, as if the clock isn't ticking, as if there will always be more time. But there won't always be more time. And the gift of understanding this isn't fear, it's clarity. Clarity about how we want to live, love, and leave this world better than we found it. The final reflection. The room is quiet. The air carries the stillness of evening, the kind that makes everything feel softer, gentler. The narrator sits by a window overlooking a garden bathed in twilight. These stories, of mothers and fathers, nurses and patients, regrets and reconciliations, have painted a mosaic of what it means to truly live. And the pattern is clear. It isn't the grand achievements or the shiny trophies we take with us into the final moments. It's the small things, the warmth of a hand held tightly, the sound of birdsong on a quiet morning, the vulnerability of saying, "I'm sorry," the courage to whisper, "I love you." These aren't fleeting moments. They're the essence of life. Death isn't just an ending, it's a mirror. It asks us to see our lives without the filters of ego, fear, or illusion. It asks us to confront our choices, where we showed up, where we held back, where we let fear dictate our lives. It asks us to be honest. When we truly face our mortality, not in a morbid way, but in an honest, tender way, we start to see time differently. Every day becomes a gift, not a guarantee. Every moment becomes a treasure, not something to rush past. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to leave love, kindness, and presence in our wake. Living fully doesn't mean skydiving out of airplanes or chasing adrenaline highs, though it could. Living fully means showing up as your whole self, even when it's hard, loving without holding back, speaking the words that matter, even when your voice shakes, being present in the small, ordinary, beautiful moments of life. Living fully means paying attention to the sound of rain on your roof, to the way someone smiles when they see you after a long day, to the fleeting moments that will one day become memories. Because life isn't measured in years, it's measured in moments. Every one of us is writing a story with our lives. The words we speak, the actions we take, the love we share. The question isn't whether we're leaving a story behind. We are. The question is, what kind of story is it? Is it a story of courage or caution? Is it a story of love or fear? Is it a story of showing up fully or holding back out of hesitation? The dying have taught us one thing repeatedly. When the end comes, most regrets aren't about what we did. They're about what we didn't do. This book isn't about death. It's about life. It's about the way death can sharpen our focus and remind us of what we already know but often forget. That time is precious. That love is what matters most. That presence is the greatest gift we can give. But the invitation isn't to think about these things. It's to act on them. Not tomorrow. Not someday. Now. What would it mean to truly live? Ask yourself, if I knew my time was limited, what would I change today? Who do I need to forgive? What words do I need to say out loud? How can I show up more fully for the people I love? What small, beautiful moment can I savor right now? Living fully isn't about waiting for perfect conditions. It's about choosing, every day, every moment, to show up, to listen deeply, to love fiercely, to forgive freely, to notice the ordinary magic all around us. The final breath. One day, we will all take our final breath. But between this moment and that moment, there is space. Space to love. Space to forgive. Space to create. Space to live. This isn't a grim reality. It's a sacred opportunity. Because death, when faced with courage and clarity, doesn't diminish life. It amplifies it. It reminds us to laugh a little louder, hold hands a little longer, speak our truth a little braver. And when the end comes, it won't be the years we count. It will be the moments. The narrator sits back in the chair by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and violet. A single thought rises like a whisper in the stillness. Don't wait. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for more time. Don't wait until it's too late. Because every breath is a chance. A chance to love. A chance to forgive. A chance to live. The sacred is waiting, not at the end of life, but within it. Every moment, every breath, is an opportunity to live fully, love deeply, and leave nothing unsaid. So ask yourself, what will you do with the time you have left? Start small. Start bravely. Start now. the gift of now. We search for meaning in faraway places, in milestones, in achievements. But the truth is, life doesn't happen somewhere out there. It happens here, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in the fleeting beauty of now. The sunlit park. The park was alive with movement and sound. Sunlight filtered through the trees, dappling the grass in patches of gold. Somewhere nearby, a child's laughter rang out, pure and unguarded. A couple sat on a blanket, their heads bent together in quiet conversation. An older man fed breadcrumbs to a gathering of pigeons, his face soft with contentment. The narrator walked slowly along the path, hands tucked into their coat pockets, eyes scanning the scene unfolding around them. This wasn't a perfect day. It was an ordinary one. But in its ordinariness, it felt sacred. A young woman sat cross-legged on a bench, headphones in her ears, eyes closed as if lost in a world of her own. Nearby, two toddlers chased each other, their giggles cutting through the noise of distant traffic. The narrator paused and took a deep breath. For so long, they had believed life's most important moments would come in fireworks and fanfare, loud and unmistakable. But here, in this quiet, sunlit park, the truth was undeniable. Life was happening everywhere. Not in grand epiphanies or carefully planned milestones, but in this, the warmth of sunlight on skin, the sound of leaves rustling in the wind, the curve of someone's smile when they think no one is watching. It was so simple, so fragile, and yet so deeply profound. We spend so much time fearing death, running from it, hiding from it, pretending it won't come. But death isn't the enemy. It's the reminder that time is finite, the reminder that every breath is a gift, the reminder that one day, the people we love, the things we cherish, and the moments we take for granted will no longer be here. But instead of filling us with fear, this truth can fill us with urgency. Not the frantic, anxious kind of urgency, but the quiet kind, the kind that whispers. Don't wait. Don't rush past this moment. Don't let fear keep you from showing up fully. Death isn't here to rob us of joy. It's here to deepen it. It's here to make us pay attention. The park was not flawless. There were patches of dead grass where the sun had been too harsh. A tree stump sat as a silent monument to something once alive and thriving. Somewhere nearby, a baby cried, and someone muttered under their breath about the noise. But none of that made the day any less beautiful. Because life isn't perfect, it's alive. It's messy and fleeting, tender and fierce, joyful and heartbreaking. The narrator watched an elderly woman sitting on a nearby bench, holding a single flower in her hand. Her eyes were closed, her lips moving as if in prayer or quiet reflection. She wasn't trying to fix the world. She wasn't trying to control it. She was simply being in it. In a world obsessed with doing, achieving, and improving, there's something radical about being. Being present in the moment. Being fully yourself, without apology. Being awake to the ordinary miracles unfolding around you. We often think of the edge of life as a distant place, a hospital bed, a final breath, a quiet goodbye. But the edge of life isn't somewhere far away. It's here. It's in the vulnerability of saying, I love you. It's in the courage of starting something new, even when failure feels likely. It's in the stillness of watching the sunset without reaching for your phone. The edge of life isn't a horizon we'll one day reach. It's a state of awareness we can step into at any moment. Right here, right now. The narrator sat down on an empty bench and let the world move around them. They closed their eyes and let themselves feel the weight of the air, the distant laughter, the quiet hum of life, unfolding moment by moment. The realization was simple, yet it carried the weight of eternity. This is it. This breath. This heartbeat. This now. We don't need more time. We don't need perfect circumstances. We don't need grand gestures. We need presence. We need to show up. For the people we love. For the lives we're living. For ourselves. The sacred now. Ask yourself, if today were my last day, what would I notice more deeply? Who would I reach out to? What would I let go of? What small moment could I savor right now? You don't need to wait until the end to start living. You don't need a diagnosis, a loss, or a dramatic moment of awakening. All you need is now. As the narrator stood and began walking home through the golden light of dusk, they carried something with them. Not in their hands, but in their chest. A stillness. A clarity. A quiet understanding that time is a gift, not a guarantee. The world didn't need to slow down. The people around them didn't need to change. The only thing that needed to change was how they showed up. With love, with courage, with gratitude. The park grew quieter as evening settled in, but one thought lingered, like the final note of a song fading into silence. Don't wait. Don't rush. Just be here. The sacred is waiting, not in some distant future, but in this moment. Life isn't something to survive, it's something to live. So take a deep breath. Feel your heart beating. Notice the light, the sound, the people around you. This is your life, and it's happening now. What will you do with it? Start gently. Start bravely. Start now. Thank you for joining us on this deeply moving journey through Dying to Live. Lessons from the Edge of Life. These stories, reflections, and lessons aren't just about preparing for the end. They're about showing up fully in the present. They're about choosing love over fear, presence over distraction, and meaning over urgency. If this audiobook has touched your heart, if it's sparked something within you, consider supporting us by visiting our Ko-Fi shop. Every bit of support helps us continue creating books and content that make a difference. But more than anything, we hope you carry these lessons with you. Don't wait. Don't hold back. Choose to live fully and intentionally while you still can. Until next time, take care of yourself, cherish your moments, and remember, life is not something to survive. It's something to live.